Hi guys, how are we doing? Thanks for joining me once again for another set of stories right here on Thailand Bound. I hope you're going to enjoy these today. So I've got 5 stories for you. The first 3 are brand new stories. They've never been read out on this channel before. Story number 3, I've put together a little montage, a little video of photographs. It was a story that took place in 1975. Nothing too thrilling, but it's quite interesting because it's such an old story. And I tag on a montage of photographs which I've made into a little video with music, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. Stories number 4 and 5 I have read out before, but a very long time ago in 2021. So to all the guys who weren't subscribed to me back then, there'll be brand new stories for you. Hopefully you haven't heard them on any other channels. Okay, so I'm not going to waste any time. Let's jump straight into story number 1.
สวัสดีค่ะ
I'm a guy in my early 30s, originally from South America, but for the past 5 years I've been living and working in Australia, specifically on the beautiful island of Tasmania. My engineering job allows me to work on a FIFO roster, 7 days on, 7 days off. So using some annual leave, I was able to take a 21-day break from work. With no solid plans, I booked a last-minute Jetstar flight from Melbourne to Bangkok. A friend of mine who was experienced in Thailand told me he'd be there for a month, and I thought about exploring a new country. It sounded a lot better than facing another brutal Tasmanian winter. I imagined myself on a tropical beach with a cold beer and a beautiful local girl. Little did I know my trip would start very differently. Things started well. I lucked out and I got a whole row to myself on the flight, which landed in Bangkok late in the afternoon. Suvarnabhumi Airport impressed me with its cleanliness and friendly staff, a refreshing contrast to the rundown airports in Australia. On the airport Wi-Fi, I booked a hotel in the Asok area, where my friend was also staying. I found a hostel-style hotel with large stylish rooms and very friendly staff, and by 8 p.m. I was ready to explore. Unfortunately, my friend called it an early night, so I ventured out on my own. The streets were lined with massage parlours and bars, women calling out, "Hey, handsome man," as I passed by. Shocked by the sudden attention, I decided to stop at a random sports bar for a beer which cost around $5 Australian, much cheaper than the 15 I paid at Melbourne Airport. I struck up a conversation with an American and some other Western men and was pleasantly surprised by how friendly the foreign crowd in Thailand was, much more sociable than what I was used to back home. After a few beers, the bars closed, and feeling tipsy, I decided to head back to my hotel. This is where everything changed. As I stepped out of the bar, several taxi drivers called out, "Taxi, taxi." Not knowing exactly where I was, I figured my hotel was nearby and happened into a cab with an older Thai driver. After about 10 minutes of driving, I noticed we weren't heading in the right direction. The driver suggests taking me to a massage parlour for some aerobics, which I politely declined, asking him to take me straight to my hotel. He insisted we visit the massage parlour first, but I refused again, and I told him that I would just get out. At that point, I realised I had no Thai baht left after a few too many beers. I explained this to the driver, offering to pay by card, but he insisted on cash. He began muttering angrily in Thai and continued driving, clearly not towards my hotel. I offered to withdraw money once we reached my hotel or buy something for him at 7-Eleven, but he rejected both ideas. His frustration was growing, and as he drove us down a dark side street, I started to panic. Without a local SIM card, I had no idea where we were. The driver kept demanding 2,000 baht, and I started to freak out. When the taxi finally stopped in traffic, I made a snap decision to jump out of the car. I ran down the street, rain pouring down, as the driver got out and began chasing me. I ran towards what looked like a train station, but in my haste, I tried to jump onto the elevated platform and missed, landing hard on the road. The pain in my leg was intense, but I knew I had to keep moving. I limped towards a nearby park and hid in the bushes, trying to lose the driver. After what felt like 20 minutes, I heard voices and saw flashlights. About 8 taxi drivers surrounded me, including the one who had chased me. One of them pushed me, demanding money and asking me why I'd ran off. In pain and unable to stand, I explained the situation. One driver who spoke some English offered to take me back to my hotel if I agreed to pay 2,000 baht. Desperate, I agreed. He transferred money to the angry driver and then drove me back to my hotel on the back of a motorbike, my legs throbbing with pain. When I finally arrived, I withdrew the cash and paid him. To my surprise, he even offered to show me around the next day, but I declined. Back in my hotel, the staff noticed my condition. One kind receptionist quickly helped me to my room and brought an ice pack for my injured leg. The next morning, I called my friend who took me to a local hospital. After a few hours, I learned that while my feet weren't broken, they were fractured, meaning I'd be bedridden for the next few days. The first 5 days of my trip were spent in my hotel room in Asok. In pain and unable to walk, thankfully strong painkillers offered some relief, and a few vivid hallucinations. Eventually, I recovered enough to start exploring Bangkok, visiting temples and experiencing the city's nightlife. Despite my rough first night, I learned some valuable lessons. Don't mess with taxi drivers. Many of them are involved in shady dealings, and you don't want trouble in a foreign country. Always carry cash. A few hundred baht could have saved me a lot of trouble. Don't try to outrun locals in their own city. You don't know the area and there could be more of them waiting. Ignore taxi drivers who call out to you. Hail one that's already moving and insist they use the meter. Thailand is a beautiful country with amazing people. Despite my ordeal, the kindness I received from locals outweighed any negativity from that first night. In the end, I chose not to report the incident to the police. What would you have done in my situation? Is it worth reporting taxi scams to the authorities? Is it worth reporting taxi scams to the authorities? Well, first of all, I'd say I do agree with him that, you never want to be jumping into a taxi that's waiting, because they want to make up the money they've lost while they're waiting. So in other words, the taxis and tuk-tuks at the end of Soy Cowboy or the taxis and tuk-tuks at the end of Pat Pong, because they will rip you off. They won't put the meter on and they'll charge an extraordinary price. They'll try and get a lot of money out of you. So in the days I used to go to Pat Pong to the bars, I don't now, Pat Pong's for me is not exciting at all. I used to come out and there'd always be half a dozen tuk-tuk drivers and taxis and they'd try and get you into their cabs and they got a bit upset if you just walk down the road. But what I used to do, I used to walk out of Pat Pong, ignore those drivers, walk down the road and flag one down, and you'd get one that would put the meter on. So that's the first thing I would agree with him. But the other thing is, I've never understood how somebody can actually go out and forget how much money they've got on them. I know you can go out and think, oh, did I spend 2,000 or 3,000? But you've got to have that emergency fund for getting home, haven't you? 500 or 1,000 baht that you keep in a separate pocket and you don't touch, And for people to get into a cab and absolutely have no money on them, for me it just seems really, really strange. I've never actually been in that situation and I can't imagine getting into that situation. The last thing I'd say on this story is, if you get into a taxi in Thailand, it's against the law for them actually not to put the meter on. It's been a big scandal for years and years and years. The government have tried, but it still goes on, especially with foreigners. So if you get into a taxi and he won't put the meter on, don't try to argue with him. You say to him once, meter. If he says no, just get out and get in the next one. I've had it years ago where I've gone into up to 4 to 5 taxis. I wanted to go from Nana Plaza down to Soy Cowboy, and they all wanted to charge me 100 baht, and I was like, no. I've even had it where I've decided to walk, because it's not about the money a lot of the time, it's about the principle. I just don't like people ripping me off. Right, I'm going to jump straight into story number 2, or else this is going to be a real long upload this week. I came across your channel during COVID while waiting for the world to reopen and craving my Thailand fix. I thought I'd share a brief story about some of my adventures in Thailand. My name is Martin and I'm from the UK. 47 years old, slim, built, and definitely not a handsome man, but I do look young for my age. I was married to a Filipino woman, though we've since separated. We met on Yahoo Messenger in the mid-2000s, and after 2 trips to see her, she came to the UK and we got married. By late 2000, we decided it was best to split up. We just drifted apart, but we're still good friends. The Philippines is a beautiful country, well worth a visit though. I can't comment on the bar scene because I was already with her and her family. In 2010, I decided to go to Thailand after a friend, a regular visitor, encouraged me to. He warned me that if I went, I might never want to go anywhere else again, and he was right. I completely understand why people fall in love with Thailand. I asked for his advice, packed my bags, and off I went, but my timing was terrible. I had booked a week in Bangkok at the end of May 2010, right when the protests were happening, plus the Iceland volcano disrupted flights. The weeks leading up to my trip were stressful, but the day finally came. I remember watching the news just before leaving, and although the protests had been dispersed, they'd left quite a bit of a mess behind. I arrived at the airport, which was nearly empty. Bangkok itself was quite quiet too, a surreal experience for such a busy metropolis. My entire stay came with a 7:30 p.m. curfew. On my first night, I stayed in the hotel as I arrived in the evening. I had a number for an escort agency, so I decided to call it. The hotel kindly reminded me that I needed to dial 9 for an outside line. Not the best start. But a girl was sent to my room. She was in her mid-20s, very cute and petite, and she stayed with me for the night. The next day, I explored the city. The hotel told me that bars wouldn't open until the afternoon due to the curfew. My hotel was near Asok, so I decided to check out Soy Cowboy as it was close by. The SkyTrain was closed and the ATMs were empty, but luckily I'd brought enough cash. By the afternoon, I headed to Soy Cowboy with a particular bar in mind, having done a lot of research and gotten advice from my friends. When I arrived, I went straight to the bar to order a drink, thinking it worked like pubs back home, but I was escorted to a seat and my drink was brought to me on a tray. As I looked up at the stage filled with girls dancing in minimal clothing, one caught my eye. If love at first sight exists, this was it. She was stunning, slim, with dark skin and the brightest smile imaginable. Her name was Nutch and I was head over heels. We spent the night together and I bar-fined her again later in the trip. Although I did bar-fine other girls too. But she was the one. We exchanged contact details and I told her I'd be back soon. I returned that August for another week, this time without a curfew, and saw how vibrant Bangkok truly is. From that point on, I became a regular visitor to Thailand, making 2 or 3 short trips a year. Nutch and I developed an open relationship. If she couldn't see me, I'd find company elsewhere, and I was always honest about it. She didn't mind, and neither did I. But after some time, she became less available, and during one trip, when she couldn't meet me, I decided it was time to call things off. It broke my heart, but it had to be done. A few days later, another girl I had been thinking about, a friend of a friend, came to mind. I didn't have her contact details, so I started visiting the bars where I'd seen her before, but had no luck. Then one night, after leaving the Eden Club, I felt someone following me. When I turned around, there she was. We went out for drinks and partied at the Bangkok Beat. One thing led to another, and she spent the night with me. But she turned out to be trouble, and that's a story for another time. In 2016, while in Pattaya, I went to a beer bar on Soi 7 where a petite girl with an amazing body caught my eye. We danced the night away on Walking Street and had a memorable time back at the hotel. She became my regular for a few trips, but she had a jealous streak, and after drinking too much, she would become unpredictable. Despite this, we kept in touch. One day on Facebook, I commented on one of her posts, and a guy replied with a not-so-friendly message. It turned out this was her new boyfriend, an Aussie named Mike, who was incredibly jealous. Despite his presence, she continued to see me, and we met up again when I returned to Thailand. She even called him after a night out, screaming at him about things he hadn't done. I felt sorry for the guy. Later that year, while at work, I received a video call from her online, which was unusual. It turned out to be Mike who berated and threatened me over the phone. I stayed calm, explained how bar girls work, and let the truth sink in for him. He hung up, but I wasn't the only one he treated this way. He eventually took her back to his home country and all contact was cut off, more by him than her. As I suspected, their relationship didn't last and she returned to Pattaya after a few months. I reconnected with her and we took a trip to Koh Phangan. She posted pictures of all the treats and experiences I gave her on Facebook, and Mike was liking the photos without realising she was with me. When he finally figured it out, he wasn't pleased, and that was the end of that. In December 2019, I made my last trip before COVID and stayed in Pattaya above the bar where I met her. By this time, we were no longer serious, but I would still bar fine her occasionally. I heard Mike was back in Thailand with a new girlfriend and knew he would visit the bar where I was staying since he was friends with the owner. Sure enough, one night he showed up. I gave it a few minutes before heading inside to see if he had anything to say, but he didn't even look at me. So much for this tough talk on the phone. I've been to Thailand over 20 times now and I love it. One day I hope to live there. I've explored many parts of the country, including an amazing road trip from Bangkok to Krabi that I highly recommend. Nutch and I are still together after 14 years. She's in her late 30s now and I'm 47. I love her to bits, and if I move there, I'll stay with her. No more holiday girlfriends. We have an easy understanding relationship. For anyone considering a long-term, long-distance relationship with a Thai bar girl, my advice is to be understanding and not worry too much about what she's doing when you're away. If you don't know it and it doesn't affect you, she has her life and you have yours. If you're prone to jealousy, this lifestyle isn't for you. Don't be like Mike. He's absolutely right, of course. I mean, the only danger from that, if you're willing to let a girl that you consider your girlfriend, to mess around with other guys, especially a working girl, then there's a big risk of catching some infection, isn't it? That's what would worry me. But apart from that, he is right. If you can come here and enjoy it for what it is, go home and forget about it, come and do it again and don't worry about it, then yeah, you can have a really good time. But for the guys who get hooked up with bar girls and they're extremely jealous, and we've all seen them, it can be tough, very, very tough. Right, okay, we're going to jump into story number 3 now. Now, this is the one I was explaining at the beginning. The guy sent it to me. The pictures were taken around 1975. I mean, wow, I was 15 years of age back then. And so what I've done, because he took the trouble to send in the pictures, and he actually said, if you want to use these pictures, you can use them. I don't normally show pictures. Guys send me pictures, and, they're great to look at, but I can't, show them to everybody. But he's actually given me permission to show these. So as I said at the beginning again, I've put them into a montage with some music, probably 20 seconds long or something. And it's just him and his friends in certain parts of Phuket. And you can see the difference to what it is now if you're a regular traveller to Phuket. Okay, so here we go. My story may be of interest to your viewers. I have included pictures and a video to add some colour to the story. You have my permission to use them. No need to change names either. In early 1975, I met up with a friend who just returned from Phuket. He said I should make a trip there as it's a beautiful island. Of particular interest was a coconut tree which had 4 branches, all bearing fruit. That planted the second seed in my mind. I rounded up some friends to join me for this foray. In October 1975, we flew to Hat Yai as there were no flights from Singapore to Phuket at that time. After landing, we headed to the bus terminal to book the tickets for the bus trip to Phuket. The bus fare was only 50 baht for the 230-kilometre journey. Ridiculous. The current fare is now 355 baht. Early next morning at 7 a.m, we boarded the bus to Phuket. The journey was horrendous as it was not an express bus and had no air conditioning. Along the way, passengers could hail the bus to get on board. We reached Phuket at about 5 p.m. It was tiring but interesting to see the different types of people using this transport. After a delicious dinner, we rested at the hotel. Next morning, Sang, my friend's girlfriend, managed to book a tuk-tuk to bring us all around. The rental was 200 baht for the whole day. The driver, Jit, said if we're happy with his service, then give him 20 baht as a tip. We gave him a lot more than that. kudos to Siang for her bargaining skills. Our first stop was to find the famous coconut tree. We went through a coconut farm to reach the site. Unfortunately, the tree was struck by lightning 2 months ago. We could only see the main trunk and the pair of V-shaped branches planted on the ground. We took some pictures of the remnants. The other interesting place we visited was the dinosaur park. There were dinosaur statues and huge sculptures at this site. This park seems to have disappeared. In subsequent trips to Phuket, I've asked around and no one is able to tell whether the park is still in existence. Jit brought us all to the beaches on the island. In 1975, there were hardly any hotels at Patong Beach. There were no crowds, no deck chairs and no touts at all. We walked along the deserted beach and our footprints were left on the fine sand, a world of difference compared to today where the beach is overcrowded. At Patong, there were 2 huge sheds at the tree line. There, you could rent sleeping bags at $2 per night and sleep at the sheds. We saw a few backpackers using the cheap accommodation. We rented a longtail boat to bring us to Koh Phangan, James Bond Island, which was quiet and had no crowds. No need to jostle to take pictures. Similarly, there were no crowds at Prom Thep Cape either. Plenty of time to pose for the best shots. Prom Thep Cape reminded me of the Coke advertisement that was very popular at the time. After 3 days, it was time to head home. On the last night, we asked Jit to bring his family for dinner. Jit cried during the dinner. He said he had served many tourists before, but none had ever invited his family for dinner. He told us he was very happy to have known us. We gave his children some money for good luck. On a lighter note, Jit told us how he got his name in Chinese, Hokkien. Jit means one. He revealed that he only had one testy, but that didn't stop him from fathering children. Now comes the interesting part. My friend Francis had been dating Siang for a couple of years. Siang was really good and I looked after him well. Francis wanted to marry her. Francis brought his old-fashioned mother to Thailand to meet Siang, hoping for her approval. Unfortunately, his mother being conservative was not in favour. The main reason was that Siang had a daughter from a previous marriage. Francis had to give up a sad ending. Siang was a very independent lady. She took good care of us during the whole trip, bargaining for us, ordering our food, and made sure we were not cheated. What surprised us was that she had a small pistol in her bag, and I'm sure she would have used it if the need arose. She handled the firearm quite well when we tried it out at the police shooting range. I'm unsure what happened to her after our departure. We did not keep in touch as the cell phone had not been invented yet. Overseas calls then were difficult and expensive. I hope she had a good life. I will be flying to Phuket next month for the vegetarian festival. If there are any interesting episodes, I will send them in to you. Wow, 1975. I wish, I'd love to have come to Thailand back then just to see what it's like. From his stories where he's standing on the beach and it's so quiet, it looks absolutely wonderful. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know I first stepped foot into Thailand around 1991, but I actually started working here in 94, and it was completely different back then to what it is today. But I would have really liked to have seen it in 1975, especially Pattaya. What was that like in 1975? Probably just a fishing village, right? Okay, right. This story, as I said at the beginning, I have read it out before. So to those guys who listen, I think I've heard this. They always send me an email saying you've read this out before. I've now warned you. Okay, so no need to email me. Let's get straight into it. Just a short email about the time I was in Thailand for the first time and events that occurred later. A little background before I start in 2012. I had a working holiday visa for Australia. My friend from university in Glasgow lived in Pattaya, and he said, why not come over to visit for a week in transit to Australia? So I did, and like every new fish in the sea, I was amazed by everything that I seen in Pattaya. I remember thinking how so cheap everything was compared to back home, and that time the exchange rate was 50 baht to £1. I had not done any research, so did not know how it all worked with regards to female company and new friends, but had an excellent time anyway. I stayed in Thailand for 9 days before heading off to Australia to look for work. I had been looking forward to going to Australia, but after visiting Thailand, I just wanted to get back, even though I'd spent around £1,500 or 75,000 baht. When I was in Pattaya, I met a girl who worked in my hotel, and she spent several nights with me, had not asked me for anything. It was kind of like a real girlfriend experience, although for a short period. Fast forward 4 months, I struggled to find work in Australia as there were so many backpackers bidding for the same jobs that I was going for as well. Being raised on a farm, I wanted to do real farm work, not fruit picking like most of the other backpackers. Eventually, I found a job on a cotton farm and worked there for 3 months. While working for those 3 months, I managed to save most of my money, which totaled 10,000 Australian dollars. And of course, all I could think about now that I replenished my funds was to return to Pattaya. Eventually, the day came. I booked a flight, Brisbane, Bangkok, Brisbane, and headed straight to Pattaya on arrival to Thailand. I was intending to have a real good time in Pattaya and spend all of my Australian dollars that I had saved. I wasn't in Pattaya for a very long time when I met a girl I liked called May. I got quite infatuated with May and I kept going back to her bar. I was a little shy and naive back then, and looking back now, I realise May played me to her advantage. I fell into all of May's traps and scams, and right from the start, I am a little angry with myself that I missed the signs and was quite foolish. Like, on the first night that I met May, I bought her lots of ladies' drinks just to be able to have her sit and speak with me. Then at the end of the night, some guy came along on a scooter. May jumped on the back and they rode off into the sunset. But me, being Mr. Newbie and very naive, I overlooked this and went back to her bar to see her on the following night. May's bar was located in Jomtien in the Rompel Beer Bars area. I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with this area of Pattaya. Anyway, time to cut through the chase and tell you what happened. I eventually managed to take May out of the bar and spend the evening in my hotel room having drinks with her. I liked May's company so much that one night became a week, and then a week became 2 weeks. I was compensating May for her time at 1,000 baht a day. At the end of the month, May asked me for some more money to buy some gifts for her daughter, who was 3 years old. I was spending a fortune, but I was blind and ignored it. Not giving too much thought, I just wanted to spend time with May and hated the thought of her returning to her bar and talking with other men. However, after 6 months or so, I started to come to my senses and realised May was playing me like a fiddle. My 1 month in Pattaya turned into 3 months, but eventually I had to return to work. When I left Pattaya, I paid 6,000 baht to May, and supposedly she was not going to work in the bar while I was working in Australia. She told me that we would go home to her village. May and I kept in touch with text messages and Facebook, and May told me that she did not want to return to work in her bar. She went on to tell me that she had found a job working in 7-Eleven near her hometown in Buriram. I thought that was great and felt more at ease knowing that she was working for 7-Eleven and not in a beer bar talking to lots of men. After about a week, I asked her how her new job was going. May told me that another girl didn't like her at the shop and would be mean to her, so she didn't want to work there anymore. I said, well, whatever makes you happy, but you have to work as you can't rely on continued handouts from me. I was still sending May 10,000 baht every month, which I thought was pretty generous. May was never happy telling me that her friends' boyfriends were sending them 20 and 30,000 baht a month, but she was only getting 10,000. It was all a scam, and like I keep saying, I was very naive back then. May told me that she wanted to go back to Pattaya and find work in a restaurant. I thought it was a good idea as long as she was working in a straight job. I knew the restaurant as we had eaten there when I was in Pattaya. So apparently May had started working in the restaurant and, like any job, received her salary at the end of the month. On the day that she supposedly received her salary, I got a frantic call from her in Australia. She was in hysterics, crying. I asked her what had happened, and she told me that the bad man had robbed her on a motorbike when she had been walking home from work. She said her ID card, along with everything else including her salary, had been stolen. She was sobbing the whole time, and of course I believed her. May's first very predictable question was, "Can you send me some money, Tilak? Because I have worked so hard all month and now have nothing." I transferred 20,000 baht to her. I was suspicious at this point, but still chose to believe her, thinking to myself, she wouldn't scam me after all I have done for her, would she? How wrong I was. Soon, it was time for me to return to Thailand again, having saved up another 10,000 Australian dollars. This time, I had booked a flight but told May that I was arriving 2 days after my real arrival date. I also told her that I would meet her in Pattaya. My plan was to have some fun by myself in Bangkok and had booked into the Novotel on Sukhumvit Soi 4, close to Nana Plaza. I wanted to have a real blowout drink, a lot, and meet up with a new girl, and that's exactly what happened, but with a sting in the tail. I started off my night at around 8 p.m. in Nana Plaza. I just sat at the bar in the middle of the plaza on the ground floor. Most of the girls in this bar seemed to be quite a bit older, so I chilled out with several cold beers. After a couple of hours, I headed out of Nana Plaza and turned right. I went to a bar that was only a couple of minutes' walk on the same side of the road. It was a good-sized bar and had a live band. I got talking to a member of staff as I was sitting alone and offered to buy her a drink so that I had some company. I could feel myself getting very drunk and decided to slow it down for a bit by drinking some water. I also remember that I hadn't drank in Australia for 3 months. The staff girl I was drinking with said her friend was coming over and could she sit at our table. I said yes, no problem. Her friend sat down. She was an absolute stunner. I had made up my mind that this lady would be joining me in my room for drinks later. I think she was a freelancer, but being Mr. Stupid, presumed that she was a normal girl and was simply a friend of the waitress back in the bar. I was so impressed with myself managing to hook up with this stunning girl. In the room, she was polite and got some drinks for us from the minibar. As it was so hot outside in the open-air bar, she had a shower and I had a shower, then we shared our drinks, and I was now very drunk. The shower did a little to help me. I was still so very drunk, and sharing a drink with this very good-looking girl was about as much as I could manage. However, that said, I thought I would try some aerobics. I felt instantly sick. This had never happened to me before. I had to rush to the toilet to be violently sick. I was sick for at least 5 minutes. The next thing I heard the door slam. Yep, the girl had left. I remember taking out 10,000 baht that night, but when I checked my wallet, only 4,000 baht remained. I couldn't remember, had she taken some money? Had I spent the money? I really wasn't sure. Nothing was missing from my room. My iPad was still where I left it. I also couldn't understand why I was so violently sick at the most crucial time of the night. Then it hit me. Did this girl slip something into my drink that made me so violently sick? Remember, nothing like this had ever happened before. That's the only thing I could think of, but then again, she could have robbed me before she left as I was stuck in the toilet being sick. I really don't know what the answer is, Peter, but it was certainly a self-inflicted incident. The story with May continues. Let me know if you want to continue, and I'll send you a follow-up story, and there is a pharmacy scam also involving me. Dear oh dear, I mean, these girls, you can't make it up, can you? One thing very important though, just put a little bit of input here. Something that the girls do quite often is they'll sit with a guy and the guy takes a fancy to the girl and he's thinking, right, I'll get to know her, and he's plying drinks with her all night. And as you know, ladies' drinks nowadays, they you can pay up to 250 baht for a ladies' drink. They're quite expensive, and they knock them back like there's no tomorrow. So, if you really like a girl and you're sitting there for a couple of hours, then you can get through some cash. And what a lot of them will do, they'll sit there and they'll take the drinks, and you'll have a massive bill at the end of the night, and you'll decide you want to take this girl out, you want to bar find her, take her back to the hotel for some aerobics, and she's already been booked out. What happens, you'll get a regular, normally a guy who lives here, who's not here on vacation. He'll take a shine to one or two girls. He'll think, okay, I'm going to go to that bar at 9 o'clock, pay the bar, but I want to go out with my friends, and I'll come back at 2 o'clock in the morning when the bar closes and take her there. And that's what happens. The guy will go 9 o'clock, he pays her bar fine, so she's been paid for, as it were, and the guy is sitting buying this girl drinks all night. When it gets to the point when he says, maybe midnight, I don't know, and he'll say, I'd like to pay your bar fine, and she's like, well, it's already been paid, and the guy's looking for, and he's down quite a lot of money. So it's always a good idea, if you're into that sort of thing, maybe buy one drink and get the feel of it, if you like the girl. And if you think you're going to spend a bit of time in the bar and buy several drinks, just ask her straight, just say, are you available if I pay your bar later? And if she says, no, I'm already bar fine, then you've lost one drink and it's time to move on, right? I mean, it's business for them. It's nothing to be shy of. Okay, I'm going to jump into this. This is becoming quite a long upload this week, so I'm going to jump into our fifth and final story. And again, I did read this out in 2021, but this is a warning to other guys who are here. You might not be that experienced. This is something that happened to this guy, and you need to look out for things like this when you come to Thailand, not just Pattaya, okay? This is the true story of my first two visits to Pattaya. I first visited Pattaya in December 2017. My first trip to Thailand after hearing about the beach town dubbed Sin City was from fellow travellers during my backpacking adventures. I booked into the hole-in-one guest house for a month, eager to experience Pattaya before continuing to Malaysia. I was stunned by the number of women and had a great time visiting the many bars around the popular drinking spots. Within an hour of arriving, I had a girl in my guest house room for drinks. Having met her at the first bar I visited on Soi Buakhao near Soi Made in Thailand. About a week later, after eating at the Robin's Nest restaurant, I wanted to explore LK Metro for a night out. Too lazy to walk back to my guest house to retrieve cash, I withdraw 4,000 baht from my ATM outside Family Mart on Soi Diana. I met a lovely girl at the Billabong bar and we had dinner at the Pattaya Beer Garden, sitting on the balcony overlooking the bay. Later that night, back in my guest house while she was in the bathroom, I put my bank card in the safe as I wouldn't need it for a while. A few days later, while watching TV in my room, I checked my online bank account and was horrified to find out that £1,790 had disappeared over 2 days. Multiple withdrawals had been made to a company called Facebook Advertising Services. I hadn't used my card except at the cash machine on Soi Diana. Panicking, I topped up my mobile phone and called my bank. As I was on hold, another 300 was withdrawn from my account. When I finally got through, the bank representative cancelled my card and reported the issue to the fraud department. Unfortunately, they couldn't send a replacement card to Thailand, only to my address in England. So my vacation was effectively over and I had to return home. Lesson learned, only use ATMs attached to banks. In December 2018, I returned to Pattaya to finish what I started. I stayed at Selina Place for a month and had a blast, meeting expats and travellers and discovering the famous Soi 6. One night, I was having coffee with a YouTuber vlogger on Walking Street. While he was headed to Ibar, I mentioned I was going to Soi Diamond. He laughed, knowing full well why. I stopped at the Carousel Bar, a quirky spot with a revolving seating area. A beautiful woman named Boone served me a single light. She had an artistic tattoo of a snake running up her leg, which she showed me. There was plenty of flirting, and I made a mental note to return to her bar later. I continued up Soi Diamond to a place the late Kevin Thailand recommended, the Windmill Club. I'll leave what happens there to your imagination, but it was intense. I had a great night and plan to return to Carousel Bar the next day to see Boone again. However, the next morning, I ended up getting lucky with the hotel housekeeper I'd been flirting with. I hope you enjoyed this story, Peter, and I can't wait to return to Pattaya for more fun when travelling alone. So a little bit of a warning there. So really the main lesson is, if you have to take money out, if you don't bring cash to Thailand and you're relying on an ATM machine to take cash, two things: always take the maximum amount out. It's normally about 30,000 baht now. The reason for that, you'll charge 220 baht per transaction. So whether you take out 500 baht or you take out 30,000 baht, it's the same. So you're better off taking 30,000 and keeping the bulk of it in your safe. The other thing is, like the guy quite rightly said, when you're using ATMs, you need to try and use them, the ones that are attached to banks, because the standalone ones, especially in very quiet areas, not so much the ones lined up outside 7-Elevens, but the ones that are kind of, they're in kind of quiet parts of the streets, as it were. People do stick kind of cameras and they change the number pads. It's very sophisticated now. It happens in London. It happens everywhere. So when you use one of these ATMs, just have a play. Don't pull too hard. Don't rip the thing off. But just make sure it is what it is, and you should be safe. And the problem is, if it goes wrong, sometimes it can take forever to go to get through to your banking wherever you come from. Right? Okay, guys, that's it from me this week. I hope you enjoyed these 5 stories. If you're sitting on a story, please send it in. I'm running very, very low now. As you see, most weeks I have to back the stories up with a repeat story, which isn't such a bad thing, but it's always nice to have newer, refreshing stories, as it were. Thanks for listening to me again. I'll be back next Saturday with some more stories. Just one thing I'd like to tell you before I leave. I get a lot of comments from the different way I do videos. Some guys like me in the video, like today. They just feel it adds more to the video. Other guys say, well, there's no need for you to be in the video. I prefer just looking at the background. The background today, Central Festival on Ramen Island, I filmed about 2 weeks ago. Okay, so I'm trying to keep everybody happy. That's what I like to do. So every other week I'll do one like this, and every other week there'll be just a background video. Okay, that should help most people out. Thanks for listening again, and I'll be back with some more stories, as I say, next week.